If these true Appalachian horror stories gave you chills, you're not alone. The woods hold secrets, and some trails are better left unexplored. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable in the wild? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoy creepy tales like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more, and tap the bell so you never miss a nightmarish tale. Let's see who's brave enough to keep the lights off tonight. Back in the summer of 1991, Ethan Morgan, a 26-year-old from Connecticut, decided to chase a dream that had haunted him for years. He'd always been drawn to the great outdoors, camping, hiking, and losing himself in places where the only sound was wind through the trees. But the tiny trails of New England weren't cutting it anymore. He wanted something bigger, wilder. So he set his sights on the legendary Appalachian Trail. He couldn't afford to hike the entire route from Georgia to Maine, but he carved out 2 weeks of vacation time to attempt the southern section, from Harper's Ferry down to Asheville, North Carolina. That stretch, he'd heard, was rugged and beautiful, remote in all the right ways. Just what he was looking for. Ethan packed light, a hammock instead of a tent, basic cooking gear, and a sharp awareness that he'd be alone most of the way. He wasn't naive. He'd read stories, encounters with bears, strange mountain folks, unexplained disappearances, but nothing could have prepared him for what actually happened. The first few days were tough. The heat was relentless, the bugs vicious, and the trail unforgiving. But Ethan adjusted quickly. There was something pure about it all. The soreness in his legs, the hunger at the end of the day, it felt earned. Most nights, he'd string his hammock between 2 trees, zip himself in tight, and fall asleep to the sounds of owls and rustling leaves. But one night, everything changed. It was his 5th night on the trail. Ethan had set up camp near a quiet ridge just off the path. The sun had long since dipped behind the mountains, and the forest was soaked in darkness. He lay in his hammock, swaying gently, half asleep when he heard it, leaves crunching. Not the random snap of a squirrel or the flap of wings in the underbrush. No, this was deliberate, slow, heavy. He froze. His eyes adjusted to the dark, and as he shifted slightly to look over his shoulder, he saw it. Someone was standing over him. Not an animal. Not a hiker calling out or shining a flashlight. A person, a silhouette, motionless, just watching. For a split second, Ethan couldn't move. His heart thundered in his chest as adrenaline surged through his veins. Then, in one fluid motion, he rolled out of his hammock, hit the ground hard, and sprinted into the trees. He didn't look back, didn't care about his gear. Whoever stood over him like that, they weren't there to say hi. He ran for what felt like miles before stopping to catch his breath. The forest around him was dead quiet. He waited, listened. Nothing. After a while, he circled back, creeping through the underbrush toward his camp. When he arrived, everything was as he left it. His pack, his hammock, untouched. But that didn't ease the dread twisting in his gut. If the person wasn't there to rob him, what the hell did they want? He grabbed his gear and bolted. No sleep that night. Just walking. Fast. Determined to get as far from that ridge as possible. For the next few days, he pushed hard. Dozens of miles. Sleep deprived. Paranoid. He started tying fishing line around his camp at night, stringing up makeshift trip alarms with empty bean cans. Every sound in the dark made him jolt awake. Once, it turned out to be a fox. He almost stabbed it, thinking it was the person returning. He laughed to himself afterward, but that night he slept with a knife in hand. A week passed. No more sightings, no more footsteps in the dark. He started to breathe again, began thinking maybe, just maybe, it had been some weird, isolated event. Maybe the guy had moved on. But then it happened again. Ethan woke up, disoriented. He couldn't move. His arms were pinned. The fabric of the hammock was pressed against his face. It took him a second to realize he'd been cocooned, wrapped up like prey. Then he felt it. The ground shifting. He was being dragged. Panic exploded in his chest. He screamed, muffled against the fabric, but no one answered. His knife was back in his pack. He had nothing. Except his watch. It was an old one, a gift from his dad. The metal clasp was slightly sharp, had scratched him a few times before. In desperation, Ethan twisted his arm, clawed at the strap, and used the sharp edge to saw through the hammock. Bit by bit, moonlight began to seep through the torn fabric. He didn't stop. He ripped and slashed until finally the hammock split open. And he ran. He didn't stop running until he reached a cabin with its lights still on. The family inside called the sheriff. They took him in, gave him water, listened with wide eyes. The sheriff arrived in the morning, but no tracks were found. No sign of the hammock, no footprints. He never finished the trail. Took the next bus back north. To this day, Ethan doesn't know who or what followed him that night. Only that someone stood over him once and a week later tried to drag him off into the woods. And the scariest part, they may still be out there. In the quiet Appalachian town of Maple Hollow, Virginia, people don't forget certain names. One of them is Daniel Lee Carter. Locals remember him as a strange, quiet man who preferred the woods over people, a man who drifted through life like smoke through trees. But what made Daniel infamous wasn't how he lived, it was how he killed. In the spring of 1981, Daniel murdered 2 hikers near the Wapiti shelter, a peaceful section of the Appalachian Trail meant for rest and solitude. The victims, both 27-year-old social workers, were hiking to raise funds for mental health awareness. Their journey was one of hope and purpose. But Daniel turned it into horror. He shot the man in the head and stabbed the woman repeatedly before bludgeoning her to death. He then wrapped their bodies in sleeping bags and buried them under leaves just off the trail. Caught weeks later in Myrtle Beach, Daniel claimed amnesia. But fingerprints, bloody clothes, and stolen belongings told the truth. He pled guilty in a deal that stunned the nation. Instead of the death penalty, he got 30 years. And even more shocking, he only served half. In 1996, Daniel Lee Carter walked out of prison a free man. By then, he was 43. He returned to his hometown and lived with his elderly mother in silence. Locals gave him wide berth. Some believed he'd changed, others knew better. And they were right. Fast forward to the summer of 2008. A pair of old friends, Brian Mitchell, 33, and Jared Collins, 31, took a fishing trip deep into the brushy mountains. It was their ritual, just 2 guys, some beer, and the quiet rhythm of casting lines into still water. That day was calm, the kind of day that made you forget the world beyond the trees. Late afternoon, a man appeared through the forest. He was thin, pale, with a slight limp, friendly enough if a little off. He introduced himself as Rick and said he'd been camping for weeks. Brian and Jared, following Appalachian tradition, invited him to join their meal. You don't turn strangers away in the wilderness. They grilled fresh trout over a small fire and passed around a thermos of black coffee. Rick talked a lot about NASA, about owning houses in Florida, about a wife who once competed in beauty pageants. The stories were grand, maybe too grand, but the guys humored him. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Brian suggested Rick head back to his camp before it got too dark. Rick smiled, stood, and called for his dog. "Come on, Bo." The dog wagged its tail. Then, without warning, Rick pulled a .22 pistol from his jacket and opened fire. The first shot hit Jared in the temple. The second tore into Brian's neck. As they scrambled to escape, 2 more bullets followed, one striking Jared's chest, the other hitting Brian near the base of his skull. Bleeding and dazed, Brian managed to duck behind a tree. Jared reached the truck, slammed the door shut, smoked, and looked to his left. Rick stood outside the window. He raised the gun again. Click. Nothing. The gun jammed or emptied. Jared didn't wait to find out. He floored the gas, tires spinning in mud, his blood-slick hands gripping the wheel. Down the winding road, headlights flaring, a figure appeared. It was Brian. Somehow, against all odds, both men had survived. They made it to a house down the road. A woman inside called 911 as her son grabbed towels to slow the bleeding. The wait for paramedics felt eternal. Both men were losing blood fast, their wounds grave. Helicopters flew them to a hospital in Roanoke. While doctors raced to save them, a state trooper spotted a stolen gray pickup on a country road. Inside was Rick, a chase. A chase ensued. Rick lost control and flipped the truck. When police reached him, the pistol was lying just out of his reach. His cold, empty eyes stared back at the flashlight beam. And that's when it came out. Rick was Daniel Lee Carter, the same man who'd murdered hikers decades earlier. He hadn't changed. He hadn't healed. He just waited. Daniel was arrested, placed in a jail infirmary under watch. But days later, during routine dinner delivery, a guard found him lying cold on the floor. No struggle, no wounds, no note. Doctors said it was likely natural causes, maybe a stroke. Maybe his heart just gave out. Some believed he died from fear, terrified of going back to prison. Others believed he simply gave up after being denied the kill he'd been craving. His funeral lasted just 30 minutes. No family, no mourners, no justice, some said. But there was one silver lining. Bo, Daniel's dog, the one who had accompanied him during both kindness and evil, was adopted by a local family. They renamed him Lucky, and Lucky now walks a peaceful trail Daniel never deserved. In the summer of 2013, Marianne Foster, a 59-year-old retired nurse from Kentucky, set out to complete the final stretch of her lifelong dream, hiking the Appalachian Trail. She'd already conquered nearly 1,000 miles from Harper's Ferry in West Virginia all the way to New Hampshire. It had been a long, steady journey. Not fast, not flashy, but determined. Marianne wasn't alone at first. She'd been hiking with her close friend, Carla Evans, a fellow outdoorswoman she'd met at a hiking club years before. The two had become inseparable on the trail. Together, they'd crossed rivers, climbed ridges, and laughed under the stars after long days of walking. But as they reached New Hampshire, Carla received devastating news, a family emergency that forced her to leave immediately. Marianne, however, insisted on continuing. The trail's end was within reach. She felt strong, confident, prepared. What no one could have known then was that Marianne was heading into the most rugged, unforgiving terrain of the entire Appalachian Trail, the remote forests of western Maine. It's easy to imagine that in a developed country like the United States, someone couldn't simply vanish by stepping a few feet off a hiking path. But those who've walked that stretch know better. The trees grow close there, thick and ancient. The ground is uneven, covered in moss and tangled roots, and once you lose the trail, it almost never gives you back. Marianne had always had a poor sense of direction. Carla had been the navigator, and the one who read the blazes and consulted the map. Alone, Marianne became flustered more easily, and sometime in early July, just days after her friend left, she made a mistake. She stepped off the path to use the bathroom and never found it again. She wandered deeper and deeper, likely thinking she'd loop back, but the forest swallowed her. The trees looked the same in every direction, and cell reception was non-existent. But Marianne didn't panic, not at first. She was experienced. She had a small notebook with her and began keeping a record. Her husband, George Foster, had been helping her with supply drops and pickups along the way. She fully believed he would come, but help never came. The messages she tried to send never reached anyone. Lost since yesterday. Off trail 3 or 4 miles, call police for what to do. Please. In some trouble. Got off trail to go to the bathroom, now lost. She kept texting George, not realizing they were stuck in digital limbo, unsent, undelivered, unnoticed. At some point in mid-July, she found a small ridge and set up camp. Using pine needles, sticks, and whatever materials she had, Marianne created a makeshift shelter. She strung up a reflective emergency blanket between 2 trees, hoping search helicopters would see the shine through the canopy. But the trees were too dense. From above, she was invisible. Rescue teams were launched. Helicopters, dogs, horses. Volunteers poured into the area, but false leads poured in too. Some from psychics claiming they saw Marianne tied to a tree. Others said she was seen hitchhiking in Vermont. One even accused George of harming her, despite there being no evidence. These distractions cost precious time Marianne didn't have. By July 23rd, the day she was supposed to meet George at Wyman Township, she hadn't moved. Instead, she wrote in her journal. Her words, steady but increasingly grim, showed a woman facing the unthinkable. Her final entry read, When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead, and where you found me, no matter how many years from now it will be. For 2 years, no one found her. It was only by sheer coincidence in October 2015 that a logging company surveyor stumbled upon her camp. Her sleeping bag lay beneath a cluster of hemlock trees. She was still inside, peaceful in appearance, her camp tidy and carefully organized. Around her were her final belongings: a rosary, 2 water bottles, one still half full, a sewing kit, dental floss, a blue and white bandana, and a small stack of birthday candles. Marianne had survived for close to a month, longer than most thought possible. She died from starvation and exposure, just less than a mile from the main trail. Searchers had likely passed within shouting distance, but the woods, thick and indifferent, kept her hidden. 2 weeks after she was found, George and their daughter Carrie visited the site. They placed a white wooden cross in the soil, decorated with handwritten messages. One, in a child's shaky handwriting, simply read, "I wish you were here." Marianne Foster's story is a haunting reminder that even in a world of satellites and smartphones, nature still has places where the human voice cannot reach. And sometimes when we go too far alone, it's not just the path we lose, it's ourselves. The summer of 2017 was supposed to be unforgettable. For Aisha Rahman, a 21-year-old student from Malaysia, it was her first time in the United States, part of an exchange program hosted at Virginia Tech. She had expected new friendships, cultural exchange, and maybe even a little homesickness. What she didn't expect was the moment she would come face to face with one of North America's most feared creatures. The Appalachian Mountains loomed in the distance like a green, misty wall. During one of the program's weekend excursions, Aisha and a group of fellow students were taken on a hiking trip deep into the wilderness. They were accompanied by 2 guides, seasoned locals, both confident and capable. The hike itself was beautiful. Towering trees, winding trails, and sunlight that filtered through the canopy in golden ribbons. Aisha had grown up in cityscapes. This was different. This was ancient, humbling. She felt both in awe and slightly intimidated by the immensity of it all. By late afternoon, the group took a break near a quiet clearing beside a slow-moving creek. Everyone dropped their packs and pulled out snacks. Aisha sat with her 2 closest friends from the program, Soil and Gabby, laughing, stretching their legs, and sipping water that had already turned warm under the sun. Then it happened. A sudden rustling in the trees. At first, no one thought much of it. Probably a deer, or a squirrel, maybe even a raccoon. But then one of the guides, usually loud and joking, whispered sharply, "Don't move, everyone, stay still." His voice had dropped an octave. Something in his tone made Aisha's blood run cold. The forest fell silent. Everyone froze, and from the tree line less than 15 feet away, a black bear emerged. It wasn't charging or growling, it wasn't doing anything particularly aggressive, but it was close, too close, and it was huge. Aisha had seen pictures of bears before. She'd even watched nature documentaries, but nothing prepared her for the sheer size of this animal. Its coat was thick and dark, eyes glinting with a calm curiosity. Its nose twitched. It was smelling them, smelling their food. The bear lumbered slowly into the clearing, sniffing the air, then sniffing the ground. It moved with a strange grace, its massive paws silent against the dirt. Then it walked straight toward Aisha. She didn't breathe, couldn't blink. Her muscles screamed to move, to run, to do something. But the guide had said, "Don't move," and so she didn't. The bear got within arm's reach. Then it stood up. It reared up on its hind legs, rising until it was almost eye level with her. It sniffed the air again, its nose now hovering just inches from her head. Aisha could feel its breath. Hot, animal, wild. She had worn a light hijab that day. The bear tilted its head slightly, seemingly intrigued by the fabric. For a second, Aisha thought it might try to paw at her. She felt her hands start to tremble, every muscle in her body tight and waiting for the worst. But the bear didn't attack. It lowered itself back down to all fours and ambled away, towards Seoul. Soel had dropped her half-eaten sandwich on the ground, hoping the smell would distract it. The bear sniffed at it, then sniffed at Soel's legs, and thankfully seemed uninterested. After another moment, it turned and wandered back into the woods, disappearing behind the green curtain of trees like a ghost. The silence hung in the air for another minute before anyone spoke. Then the guide exhaled and muttered, "That was too close." Everyone let out the breath they hadn't realized they were holding. A few people even laughed nervously. Aisha didn't. Her hands were still shaking. Back at the trailhead, when it was all over, Aisha sat on a fallen log and stared off into the trees. The others chatted, snapped pictures, and high-fived about their close call. But for her, it wasn't something to celebrate. It was something deeper. She hadn't just seen a bear. She had looked into the eyes of something ancient, something wild. Not evil, not good, just nature, raw and unpredictable. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "I understand now why people fear the forest, not because of monsters, but because of moments like today. Moments where something bigger than you reminds you that you're not in control, and never were." She'd kept that journal entry folded in the back of her notebook for years. Sometimes, when life felt too busy or chaotic, she'd read it again, and she'd remember that moment, that stillness, the closeness of life and death, the hush of the forest, the breath of the bear, and the decision she made not to run. When Logan Thompson was 12 years old, he went on a Boy Scout camping trip that would haunt him for years. It was mid-July, and the Smoky Mountains were buzzing with summer life. Cicadas humming, rivers whispering, wind threading through the leaves like breath. For Logan, it was supposed to be a weekend of hiking, roasting marshmallows, and earning another patch for his collection. But that trip gave him something far more lasting than a badge. The camp was nestled deep in the woods near Clingman's Dome, surrounded by old-growth trees and fog that seemed to hang in the air even after the sun came up. It was a beautiful, almost sacred place, but it had a strange weight to it. The kind of place where stories get told around a fire, and those stories feel just a little too real. That's exactly what happened on the second night. The troop gathered around the fire after dinner, warm and full and tired. One of the scoutmasters, Mr. Green, pulled out a flashlight and shined it under his chin. That alone made a few kids giggle. But the laughter died quickly as he launched into the legend of Spearfinger. She was a figure from Cherokee folklore, he said. A creature with skin made of stone, a single long, sharp finger like a spear growing from her right hand. She hunted children, especially those who wandered too far from their families. And the worst part? She could change shape. She could look like your grandma, your mom, even your scoutmaster. She'd lull you into a sense of safety, run her fingers through your hair, hum a quiet lullaby, then drive that stone finger through your neck and rip out your liver while you slept. By the end of the story, none of the boys were laughing, least of all Logan. That night, Logan crawled into his tent with his best friend Owen, zipped up the flap and pretended he wasn't freaked out, but he couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, the snap of a twig, the whisper of a breeze, felt like a warning. His mind played tricks on him, painting shadows against the fabric of the tent. Sometime after midnight, Logan finally began to drift off. That's when the light appeared. A pale, unnatural glow lit up one side of the tent. Logan's eyes snapped open. He turned to Owen, but Owen was sound asleep, breathing softly. Logan whispered his name, no response. Then came the hissing sound. Not an animal, not wind, a deliberate hiss, like someone calling out just beyond the nylon wall. He sat upright, heart pounding, throat tight. Outside, a shadow moved. Logan could see the outline clearly, someone standing just inches from the tent, their head turned. Then slowly, they raised a hand, and from the silhouette, Logan saw it, a single, long, pointed finger. A sharp whisper followed, "Welasiko." Logan didn't think. He screamed, loud, panicked. Tor opened the tent flap and burst into the clearing like a wild animal. His scream echoed off the trees. "Spearfinger! She's here! She's gonna take my liver!" Camp erupted in confusion. Flashlights flicked on, Boys shouted. Scoutmasters came stumbling from their tents, yelling for calm. But amidst the chaos, someone was laughing. Logan turned and saw him. Owen bent over, howling with laughter. In his hand, a stick tied to his finger with string. "You should have seen your face." Owen gasped, tears in his eyes. "Dude, you sprinted out of that tent like your soul was on fire." Logan stood frozen, embarrassed, still shaking with leftover fear. He looked around at the faces of the other boys, some confused, some amused, but no one else had felt what he felt. No one else had seen the shadow up close, breathing at the edge of the fabric. The Scoutmasters tried to calm things down. One even laughed. They all figured it was just a prank that got a little too real. But Logan didn't sleep that night, and in the years that followed, even when he laughed about it, even when he told the story at campfires himself, there was always a part of him that stayed quiet, because deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Owen hadn't been the only one outside that tent. Maybe in the darkness beyond the tree line, something had been watching, waiting, listening to its name being spoken in fear and smiling. Because the legends say that Spearfinger lives in the Smokies, that her feet still shake the mountain floor, that when birds fall silent and fog clings to the ground, she's near. So when you camp out in the woods far from home and you hear a whisper you don't recognize or see a shadow that doesn't quite belong, just hope it's your friend with a stick. Because if it's not, you might not make it back to tell the story. Have you ever heard a legend so eerie it stayed with you long after the story ended? If Spearfinger gave you chills or reminded you of your own campfire tale, we want to hear it. Whether it's a story passed down in your family, something you experienced deep in the woods, or a local legend from where you grew up, share it in the comments. Do you think Owen's prank was just an innocent joke? Or do you believe, like Logan, that something else might have been out there that night? Sometimes the scariest part of a story is what's not explained. The part that lingers in the shadows, watching, waiting. If you've ever experienced something strange while camping or hiking, something you couldn't quite explain, drop your story below. We read every comment, and some of your true tales may even be featured in a future episode. And hey, if you enjoy exploring dark legends, chilling encounters, and stories that blur the line between myth and reality, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more unsettling content just like this. Your voice matters here, and who knows, maybe your story is the next one that keeps us all up at night.